For me, nothing makes a game more interesting faster than unnecessary peripherals. These days, it seems like modern game consoles are kind of afraid of messing around with superfluous plastic junk, but video games started as toys, and those roots, I think, should always at least be a part of the industry in some capacity. Of course, Nintendo are the kings of this sort of design philosophy, often putting together things like the Wii remotes or the Joy-Cons on the Switch that might seem ridiculous and cumbersome at first glance. All that can certainly bring the GameCube to Game Boy Advance link cables to mind. These accessories Nintendo put out in the early 2000s that allowed you to connect your GameCube to your Game Boy Advance. What might look like a simple way to get Pokemon onto the big screen actually had support in over 50 games from Nintendo and third-party companies. They could unlock bonus features, give you extra items, stuff like that, but they could even put a whole minigame onto your Game Boy for you to take elsewhere. As a big fan of the GameCube generation, I came to really love all of these silly little features, both big and small. But it wasn't just tied to extra features, because there were games that were designed exclusively for this accessory, my personal favorite being The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures. I don't think I need to explain to you what Zelda is, but 4 Swords was originally a side game released with Link to the Past on the Game Boy Advance that had you playing as up to 4 Links on multiple levels, playing together through the Game Boy link cable. While 4 Swords on the Game Boy Advance is a pretty cool game in a lot of ways, I felt like at the time that it was somewhat limited and didn't feel like a complete package. For a long time, I felt like 4 Swords Adventures was the definitive multiplayer Zelda experience. It's one of the most unique multiplayer experiences you could have, especially for its time, and I think it holds up surprisingly well. So today, I hope you'll join me as we take a look at The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures for the good old Nintendo GameCube. I'm gonna have a hard time referring to this as 4 Swords Adventures every time, so if I just say 4 Swords from now on, assume I'm referring to the GameCube one and not the Game Boy Advance one. I don't think you can talk about 4 Swords Adventures without mentioning the insane process that it takes to get this game running at full capacity. You of course need a GameCube, a copy of 4 Swords Adventures, 4 GameCube to Game Boy Advance link cables, and 4 Game Boy Advances. And I guess a TV and a memory card if you want to be technical about it. I did the math, and if you adjust for inflation and bought everything at retail, all of this stuff together would be over $1,000 US. To be fair, I'd assume the majority of people that played this in 2004 would have gathered their GBAs and cables between friends, but I think the point still stands. The cables weren't too much to ask for to manage 2 players co-op, which I think is still a great way to play the game. But even after all that, there's still one hurdle you have to overcome to play this game with a bunch of friends, and that's that you just kind of have to know about Zelda. I don't think you would enjoy this game very much if you didn't have experience with the previous Zelda games, and while I'm willing to be proven wrong, I'd be really surprised if any of you played this as your very first Zelda, unless it was just by coincidence. The game relies on a lot of tropes and things that it expects you to know from other Zelda games, and so if you don't have that background knowledge, it might not really appeal to you. Because of all these things, it can be really difficult to get a full group of people to play 4 Swords Adventures. I only managed to get this game running with 4 people once, and that was as a kid when everybody else had tons of time. As an adult with responsibilities, it's nearly impossible to get a group of 4 people for a 10 to 12 hour campaign. But going through it alone wouldn't do this game justice, so I brought in my buddy Matt, who's also got a YouTube channel if you want to check him out. His link will be in the description. Go say thanks. But now, with all that setup out of the way, let's hop into 4 Swords and see what it's all about. Four Swords Adventures is effectively an enhanced retelling of the Game Boy Advance game that has nearly the same story. Sometime in the past, the evil wizard Vati was sealed away by the 4 Sword and locked into a shrine. 6 maidens and Zelda guard the portal to the seal, but fearing it might be failing, they open it up again. Shadow Link, not to be confused with Dark Link, appears out of the portal and tricks Link into pulling the 4 Sword out, which lets him free once again. But with Vati loose, the Links are sent flying away. Eventually, Kaepora Gaebora finds them and tells them to collect the Force Gems scattered across Hyrule, to restore the strength of the sword and then use that to save Zelda, the Maidens, and Hyrule. It's probably the most generic Zelda story you could possibly imagine, and not nearly as deep as any of the other console Zelda games from around that time. But that's obviously not the point. Four Swords Adventures is a multiplayer game, and it isn't trying to throw you into some complex narrative while the three of your friends are just waiting around. All this is meant to just give you an excuse to play the first level and get started. The game plays pretty much identically to any 2D Zelda game, moving around in a top-down perspective, attacking and using items and picking stuff up. There are a few extra moves that you can do that aren't specifically told to you, like a jump attack that you do by tapping in a direction with B. It's a bit more in-depth of a moveset for a 2D Zelda game, but still pretty straightforward. There are some changes made, though, to work with the focus on multiplayer. If you're on your own, you can position your links into a diamond or a square, and if you're controlling one at a time, you can press L to zoom in on yourself. Pressing select when you have more than one link also lets you move them individually, so you can tackle separated objectives. Hitting L when you're on your own will also bring all the other links back to you in a pretty satisfying way. Four Swords is broken up into 8 worlds, each with 3 stages between them, usually consisting of a more linear open world level, a unique level like a cave or a village, and a dungeon with a boss fight, though the structure does get mixed and matched. The first world is more of a tutorial, but it shows off what makes the game unique, with some simple puzzles that force you to cooperate in a variety of ways. Maybe you'll need to organize who's pushing blocks, gather up to pull a switch together in a row, or just work together to fight a bunch of enemies. But the coolest thing is that because you're all playing on your own dedicated handhelds, you can use the screen on it separately. Not only do you have up to 4 players sharing the TV screen, but each link can move back and forth between the TV and the Game Boy Advance for interiors like caves. It creates this really fun dynamic where you're each split off to look around inside of a cave or whatever, while trying to scrounge around for force gems and items. There are also a few 2D areas akin to Link's Awakening that show up once in a while as well. It led me to have tons of footage of just empty screens, but off screen I was messing around doing cool stuff on my GBA. A nice touch is that if somebody else is underground while another person tries to leave the area, the game will show who's straggling behind on the TV, so oftentimes we would do that while waiting around. So you'll be running inside the castles or whatever and communicating about where to go, what to do, or what you found in every room. It's a pretty cool concept and something I don't think I've seen replicated since. The beach level in World 2 also highlights a pretty common trope, where Shadow Link will appear and drop these massive bombs that can instantly kill you if you don't get underground. You have to run to the safety of the GBA to avoid these bombs, moving in and out of underground sections to pass through. Shadow Link shows up pretty often throughout the levels, often doing this bomb thing or just making you fight him face to face. The second stage of World 2, though, has to be one of the best examples of what makes Four Swords Adventures cool. The village of the Blue Maiden has you exploring a mysterious town, using hints from villagers to find open portals to get to the Dark World, and then using that to solve puzzles and save the village. There's a bit of a confusing start where you have to talk to the same guy more than once to get this moon pearl, but that allows you to open up the gates and proceed into the actual stage. After you get into the main village, it's a really cool type of level. If you've ever been to one of those escape room type things, it's a lot like that. You'll be picking locks and exploring a closed space to find out how to get keys to open the next set of locks. Usually these keys are the moon pearls that I mentioned that open up the portals in and out of the Dark World. So you'll find a pearl to use in a section of the town and then hop into your GBA to explore the Dark World section of that area. And then with that information, you can go to the next section and solve another puzzle there. Unfortunately, most of the problem solving happens off the TV in this level, so it can be difficult to show off what makes this stage so cool. But believe me when I say that figuring out what to do in this level is a special sort of fun that you can only get through this kind of team-based puzzle solving. And not just puzzle solving in the sense that you're literally figuring out a puzzle box, but also solving hints and using tips from villagers and, seeing what this guy says and then telling your friends that they said one thing. It's a great stage that turns this whole town into this sort of puzzle box riddle that you have to explore around to figure out what to do. These sorts of stages tend to be the highlight of Four Swords Adventures, and there are a few other ones throughout the game. In a lot of ways, the village of the Blue Maiden makes the somewhat standard dungeons like the Eastern Temple that follows it feel somewhat less memorable. In Four Swords, each player can only carry one item at a time, so in most stages you have to decide who's gonna do what job. Green will carry the bombs to open up walls, and red can grab a slingshot to hit some ranged targets. I think dividing up tasks between players is a simple and effective way to create engaging co-op scenarios, and while I don't think Four Swords was the first to do it, it's certainly one of the earliest examples I can think of a pretty staple concept in co-op games. There's a decent selection of items to use in Four Swords, but the roster does feel a little generic. Not counting passive items like the power bracelets or heart containers, there are a total of 10, and a third throughout the campaign you've already seen the majority of them. There aren't any new items, and most of them, like your staple bows and boomerangs and lamps, show up. However, the new abilities that some of them have and the context of multiplayer does give them a good reason to be there. Rock's Feather gives you a downward thrust attack, and the Fire Rod can be held like a flamethrower, which coupled with a row of links can be a lot of fun against a wave of enemies. Interestingly, the Nat Hat and Rock's Cape, which were introduced in Game Boy Advance Four Swords, are nowhere to be found. The level 2 upgrades you get from the Fairy's Fountain do also add a lot of variety, but I think that it would have been cool to just see a few more original items instead of them all being recycled. Speaking of recycling, let's talk a bit about the graphics. Four Swords Adventures is almost entirely constructed by reused assets from A Link to the Past, ranging from environment sprites to objects and everything in between. Here's a fun fact I didn't know before doing this video. The game actually used recolored Link to the Past Link sprites back in the 2003 E3 build. It's all been heavily edited to work with this game, but it still might be one of the only sprite-based games on the GameCube. The only one I could think of off my head is Alien Hominid. The added effects and lighting do a lot to make the game much more exciting to look at though, and I feel like Four Swords Adventures does a really good job at making it feel cohesive. Even though the links are all reused from the Game Boy Advance sprites, I think that something about their blank stares running around makes them feel goofy and fun in a good way. The whole concept of Four Swords works perfectly with the Wind Waker Toon Link look, and I appreciate the small touches like how their voices are all slightly pitch shifted. Sometimes though, it's pretty clear that they had to cut some corners. This area with these fuses looks really jarring next to the clean sprite patterns, and a lot of bosses were taken from Wind Waker and just sort of digitized in a really out of place feeling way. Phantom Ganon looked a little off when we first saw him, and the Helmrock King is even more so. By no means would I call Four Swords Adventures a bad looking game, but it's obvious that the gameplay in mind couldn't really work with much more unique sprites. But there are some moments where I wish there was a little bit more attention to small details. Sometimes sprites have clipping issues, especially on rocky walls, and other times the game will throw sprites around like flat billboards, though it's pretty clear to me this was done as a gag. While the game is almost entirely made out of 2D sprites, you do have to admit that they used that to their advantage. Enemies show up in huge waves at a time, and they play around with different effects and motions to really give it more life. Either way, it's obvious that all of this was done to make the transition between GameCube and Game Boy Advance graphics that much more natural, and I think they succeeded in that way. Because the game is broken up into individual chapters, sometimes Four Swords Adventures can feel like a selection of moments rather than one cohesive adventure. But stuff like this is a big part in what makes this game that much more fun to play with a group. Levels will usually focus on one or two gimmicks and moments that function like activities to encourage cooperation or competition. The area here has you grabbing carrots that allow you to ride a horse around for a bit, that you can use to jump over fences, but also to flatten your teammates. The original Four Swords art says it all. 4 links gathered up in a group, causing a bunch of shenanigans and messing with each other until they eventually work together to complete the objective. And the game does a lot to make playing with friends a fun and hectic experience. The links obviously have to work together eventually, but you can often rope each other into your own messes or just troll your friends. There are dozens of ways to cause unintentional or intentional chaos. Not only do you get tossed around by enemies way more than any other Zelda game, but you can pick up and throw other links around, which they have no control over. And when you're set on fire running around, you can touch other links to set them on fire as well. A lot of the time we would bump into each other, pushing the other one into a pit accidentally, or in 2-player accidentally steal each other's links. It's insanely easy to just cause a frenzy of links all shouting, yelling down holes. And while that might sound frustrating to some people, it's kind of the point. I couldn't gather up a full squad for most of this playthrough, but I did have a moment to get 4 people all at once, and it's exponentially more fun. We did a handful of stages with 4 links, and the game becomes so much more chaotic, and nearly every task is infinitely more interesting to accomplish. Something as simple as crossing a gap becomes this coordinated effort that would just be trivial in single player. One of us also wasn't as good at the game, and so it became this fun little thing cheering them on or helping them out whenever we got into a difficult situation. Four Swords is great cooperatively, but the game also encourages you to just annoy the living daylights out of your buddies. In every stage, you need to gather 2,000 Force Gems before you reach the end. Doing this not only upgrades your swords and lets you open the gate, but also functions as your final score. You could simply ignore it and play as a team, but at the end of every stage, the best link is determined the winner based on how many gems they've found. You drop your gems for others to steal when you get damaged or die, and the game is loaded with areas to allow you to nab more gems than your teammates. It's really funny to me that the only thing you can do when you're down is nudge yourself around and slam the floor in anger. Even if the dungeons and puzzles were good fun, there was always a little minigame being played while we tried to score more gems than the others. And after the stage is done, the game will drop the color of the winner's link onto the map afterward. It's got a very party gamey mindset considering there's a lot of cooperative gameplay with the puzzle solving. And so I imagine this style might not work for everybody. I can almost guarantee that somebody that watches this video that played this game in 4-player or less even, realized that one of their friends could troll the heck out of you and it just ruined the whole experience. Thankfully for us, most of the messing around was just for the heck of it, and most of the time it was actually pretty fun. Something I really love though is that when you're in a 4-player game, the results screen will allow players to vote on who was the biggest jerk and who was the most helpful. If you're downvoted, you'll lose some gems or even get labeled a shadow link, while if you're commended by your team, you'll earn some gems for being a good guy. At least if you're getting in everyone's way, you probably won't win the level. Four Swords Adventures does support single player like I mentioned, but if I had to be honest, even though it's there, I wouldn't recommend it. We played the entire game with at least the 2 of us, which I think is plenty of fun, but the game is just simply not that interesting if you're by yourself. It's perfectly functional, but it just removes a lot of the charm of the experience. If you're on your own, the single item limit to hold one at a time is still in place, so levels will often involve retreading your footsteps multiple times while swapping between links or items, and a lot of the interesting task management ends up being your job entirely. The only thing I think that single player has over multiplayer is that you get to use a bunch of items together in tandem, which can be fun to mess around with. It's really simple Zelda stuff, but the added dimension of multiplayer takes it to a whole different place. Normally in a Zelda game you'd be solving your own problems, but with Four Swords you get to communicate as much or as little as you want, or just mess around. It's a specific type of game that might not appeal to everyone who likes Zelda, but is definitely worth checking out at least once. Eventually, the links all come across another Zelda staple, which is a collection of 4 MacGuffin gems that will open the path to the Tower of Winds where Vati is. They're basically meaningless, but they're mandatory, so I guess they're there to just feel like a Zelda game. In Four Swords Adventures, the puzzles tend to be a bit on the safer side so that you can play through the game with your friends pretty easily, but every once in a while we would get stumped. There was this puzzle where we needed to bring the Lynx across a poisoned area where you get the Moon Pearl to open a path to the Dark World, find Dompe there who gives you a power bracelet, and then it just seems like there's no way to get the Lynx over to hit the button. So we spent a long time messing around in the Dark World trying to find a way to kill these ghosts until we realized that you can carry Lynx outside through the Dark World. As far as I know though, there aren't any real hints that you can do this and you just gotta figure it out. But that wasn't even the biggest problem we had in this one level. Immediately following this, we realized we had no idea what to do next, and the crying ghost girl here didn't react to the ghosts being gone. Instead, we just got stuck. The solution? Pick up the tree. Yeah, you just lift the tree and you chuck it away. Funny, good moment for sure, but man, we had no idea that was even an option. It turns out that in the Japanese manual, you actually do have a list of items and the power bracelet says you can pick up trees. But at least in my copy of the game, there's no info on items. There are dozens of fun ideas for levels in Four Swords Adventures, but these hiccups along the way can sometimes ruin an otherwise great stage. Especially for a multiplayer game, these things can be a lot of trouble because if you're playing with your friends, it can completely kill your momentum. Even though the game can sometimes have a hard time communicating what to do, levels like the Lost Woods managed to do some interesting stuff with the tools they had available. This level is a lot more exploration heavy like the Village of the Blue Maiden was, and has you doing tasks for Deku Scrubs by gathering the objects they want. Using each link kind of like a pack mule, you'll have them gather water jugs, rocks, and signs, and deliver them in the correct order. The game isn't often challenging, but these moments are clever and fun in ways that don't require the game to be difficult. The Lost Woods was a pretty great example of what I like to see in Four Swords Adventures, but there were plenty of other cool level gimmicks that you would see throughout the whole story. Here are some other ones that I liked. The End of World 4 had you raiding Hyrule Castle with a whole stealth segment that would focus on you if you broke pots and made too much noise. Breaking pots is so habitual that we struggled really hard here. And one of the later levels was entirely done in 2D, where we had to have one guy do the platforming with a feather and the other hold onto a fire rod to clear ice blocks. The temple in World 5 was pretty cool too, specifically the part where you push a room around in order to create a bridge or use it to clear obstacles. That dungeon also had one of the few examples I found where the single player and multiplayer level design is completely different. There are two entrances on the right side that split the neighboring room in half, and in multiplayer you have to share the items through the middle section and then step on buttons on the other side of the hall, but if you're on your own, it's split into two distinct areas. I really liked seeing that some sections had to be changed for certain numbers of players, and I just felt like that it was really... Yeah, so around this point was when we started having some problems with the aging tech of the Game Boy Advance and I guess the GameCube cable. So whenever somebody disconnects, even if it's for a second, the game will kick you out straight to the title screen. It doesn't give you any real chance to continue where you left off, and there were quite a few moments where we would disconnect partway through the level and then just have to restart. It's pretty disheartening, and I remember having trouble with this even years ago because sometimes cables just disconnect randomly. When somebody hits the GameCube maybe, or the cable gets tripped on, and you suddenly lose 20 minutes of gameplay, it can really hurt your desire to continue. It's definitely possible that this was just something to do with my Game Boys or my cables, but we did try to mix and match the ones that I had. If this was common for somebody else that's played the game before, let me know. We're getting close to the end of the game, so let's take a look at the collection of minigames that Four Swords Adventures has on offer. After the second level of a given world, Tingle will show up and offer access to Tingle Tower, where you can take a break and play some of his minigames. The games consist of simple things like a whack-a-mole or a game of tag, but the monster hunting game and a few others are great for some dumb fun between stages. It does feel like they ran out of ideas pretty quickly because the last minigame is pretty much just an extra dungeon, But that's not everything. Besides the main game Hyrulean Adventure is Shadow Battle, a deathmatch mode of sorts that has a bunch of unique maps to play on. It does also feel like a tacked on versus mode, which was the style at the time. It can be fun at times, but I just think the levels are a little too big and it can be way too easy to just run away. There's a decent bit of content though, 5 stages, and then after you beat the game, you get these 5 darker versions. If you didn't know though, there was meant to be a third game mode in Four Swords Adventures known as Navi Trackers, which was only released in Japan and I think Korea. Apparently it was originally shown in 2003 at E3, but I couldn't find that footage of it and it never made it here anyway. Thankfully, I do have a Japanese GameCube and a copy of the game, so we decided to try it out. From what I understand, Navi Trackers is another competitive game mode where you try to gather medals that are scattered by the pirates from Wind Waker across an island. Instead of moving between the GBA and TV screen, the TV is instead focused on Tetra and a map who gives instructions on what to do or what's going on. It's fully voice acted too, which is probably why the mode never got localized, but it's really cool to see these Zelda characters talking in full sentences. I can't really tell if Navi Trackers is fun because it was just impossible for us to comprehend what they're saying quick enough, but even if it wasn't that good, it's still a huge loss for the English version of the game. There's a considerable amount of stuff to do here, but we just couldn't understand it, so we couldn't properly enjoy it. Not having Navi Trackers is a pretty big disappointment, but at least we got these cool little cutscenes rendered with the Wind Waker models. The last few worlds in Four Swords felt like some of the best parts of the game, but that might just be because I forgot most of the second half. The end of the game has you traveling through the desert, a frozen forest, climbing the Tower of Winds, and then exploring the temples above the clouds. The boss battle in the Tower of Winds was pretty interesting, and using multiple items in conjunction to knock it down and then stab it in the eye was something I wish the game had more of. The later levels in the final area, the Realm of the Heavens, also had plenty of fun mechanics, like this moving platform that I have to imagine would be a disaster with 4 players. Finally though, we made it to the last level and the final battle with Vaati. The fight is simple enough, just throw bombs up the whirlwind and then shoot them with the bow. But there's only one bow in the room, so only one of us was actually able to do anything at times. With him defeated, the castle begins to fall apart and you need to escort Zelda out to safety, Ocarina of Time style. But just as the Links make it out alive, the darkness reappears. Four Swords is like a pastiche of every Zelda game, and there's nothing more Zelda than a last-minute Ganon boss battle. The final battle with Ganon is a good time. He takes a lot of damage and banishes you to the Dark World if you get hit by his beams, and eventually Zelda starts charging up and you just have to reflect a few more attacks until you get the last shot and seal the deal. After a long and weirdly quiet score screen, the Links can finally return the Four Sword to its place, returning together as one, bringing us to the end of Four Swords Adventures. You know, I got this game at a birthday party. Not my birthday party. I went to a birthday party as a kid and someone just gave it to us. might be the best party favor I'll ever see. Zelda Four Swords Adventures does a lot of really cool stuff and feels like a proper execution of the ideas that they had in the Game Boy Advance game. But after playing it again and looking at the package as a whole, there are still some aspects that I wish were more fleshed out. I wish that the game had more attempts to properly challenge a group of players with some tougher puzzles or more cooperative combat, though technical limitations at the time might have made it too difficult to go to separate locations at once inside of a single area. I think having more sections where links could really split up and look for clues would have been a lot more engaging. I really like that the game rides the line between a co-op game and a party game, and I think that aspect's done really well. Though when put beside the main Hyrulean Adventure story mode, a lot of the really dedicated party mode stuff just doesn't really hold up. I can't speak for Navi trackers, but Shadow Battle might as well have been part of Tingle Tower. With that said though, I think that if you're a fan of the Zelda series, there's nothing quite like playing Four Swords Adventures among a group of people on couch co-op. It's chaotic, silly, and a great time with friends, assuming you can actually gather all the ingredients required to do it. But as fun as the game is in multiplayer, it does not hold up on its own as a single-player Zelda game. It's just too basic at times and too generic to really warrant doing it on your own. Even if you can't find the opportunity to play this game with 2 to 4 people, playing it on your own will just spoil it when you do get the chance to. So it's probably not worth it. If you can't get a group of people to play this game, I would probably say to skip it. I do think though that there are still a lot of Zelda fans today that haven't played Four Swords Adventures and might like it if they got the chance to play it in 4-player. With how big modern TVs are though, I think you could easily run this game on Switch 2 with a 4K TV and having a whole bunch of split screens. So I'm really hoping that one day we can see them re-release this game in an accessible way with online or local co-op. Despite how much I like Four Swords Adventures, I have to admit it is just way too difficult to get this game operating at full capacity given its age. Four Swords Adventures is so much fun, and I wish more people got to experience it because aligning the stars to play a 4-player co-op game is just a little bit out of the question. Either way, that's all I've got left, so that brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed watching this, I would really appreciate your support by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment sharing your thoughts below on Four Swords Adventures. This channel is also about to reach 30,000 subscribers, which is a huge deal, and it'd be awesome to get there just in time for the new year. So if you have been watching this channel and really enjoying the stuff that I do, but haven't subscribed yet, I would really appreciate your support there too. That said, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.